The title of the talk comes from this work I did called Pregnancy. And there I already have a word that I don't know how to say in Spanish. ¿Cómo se dice pregnancy? Embarazo? Okay. I'm going to try to show some of this work. I didn't get time to download it all, so hopefully the internet is going to work. If it doesn't, then we'll just move on with our lives. But this is I think of this as a bioart project, or kind of a hybrid bioart and poetry project. And I think the poems kind of explain what it is. So I'm going to go ahead and show it and read it to you as it goes. (2014-1201-163491.mov) A blizzard of hormones. For months, undersea volcanoes spewing hot affects, tectonic emotional swings, intense food cravings. My body is foreign to me. It's changing in ways I don't like. Shape, texture, and so many little black hairs coming back, despite being tortured out of existence. On my cheeks, in my cleavage, I have to wear baggy clothes. All my underwear was too tight for gamete-making temperatures. I have to take my vitamins every day, all to make a baby. I am a trans woman, and I'm pregnant. (2014-1219-1654551.mov) I am no testo junkie. This is no experiment. These are not drugs. They're my body. I take hormones every day of my life out of necessity, just to have a body I can live in, to avoid death, to survive, both to avoid my own suicidal ideation that appears in my mind unwillingly, instantly, surprisingly, usually with a painful, slowly resonating ache. As I look at some beautiful woman or some everyday woman going about her life, a life I thought I could never have, though now mostly in my own way I do, and to avoid death at the hands of others, the constant promise of necropolitics that I face every day. Knowing that as a trans woman of color, I'm not likely to survive until my next dream is realized, my next poem is written, my next performance is danced and spoken, my next city or country welcomes me, my next surgery date comes, or this time, until I see the eyes of my bright, screaming, beautiful baby come into this dimension and join us with her cries of creation. I'm not taking hormones now out of necessity, the feeling of urgency of reproducing in the face of a world that wants me dead, that wants my dearest loved ones from South Asia, Palestine, Colombia, dead, or here from Mississauga, New Credit Territory, dead. I want to read that last part. And we will fight back these genocidal projects by making life, family, love, and joy, by making babies with our queer and trans bodies. Instead of 2014-12-23-154-845.mp4, instead of a becoming woman or becoming animal or even becoming parent, this feels like becoming asshole. I hate testosterone. There are many reasons why I take estrogen and spironolactone to block my testosterone. I feel the edge back in my mind, the edge of impatience, of being quick to anger. The old version of myself seeps in my voice, which sounds so deep and strange to me. My friends who've done this told me to take Xanax, but I prefer the tincture of motherwort I got from my crazy femme witch friend that she gave me after my mother almost died. It's the only thing saving my life right now in my relationship after weeks of solid fighting, mostly over my inability to understand my new emotional waves, rhythms, and tempos. My partner and I thought we might break up because of the chemical changes in my neuronal activity that resulted in weeks of mean fights. But I did this so we can make a baby together. Now the motherwort is doing its magic. I feel it in the corners of my eyes like sleepiness, relaxing my anger and anxiety, finally giving me, for the first time in weeks, tiny moments of the sense of peace that I feel from estrogen. 2014 1227 195816.mp4. While I once thought taking hormones was a good experiment, an ethico-aesthetic experimental life act in the spirit of Deleuze and Guattari, now I realize what a masculinist, colonialist dream that was, and I don't like that old self of mine. Some of us write out of need. For some of us, this is not a luxury, as Lord said. Now, after so many years of taking them, I realize that in these pills there is a home for me. These pills and all the changes they've brought to my body and life have brought me to a place of commitment to building a home and a family, to heal the deepest wounds in myself, to care for myself and those I love by creating stability, by being careful with our hearts and our lives. Funny that my Colombian father's whole way of raising me was to teach me to be the man, the breadwinner, and it didn't work at all. But absolutely rejecting man in the deepest way I could brought me full circle to want to create and protect my family in a way that Dad will one day appreciate. They told me I would be sterile, the doctors and brochures, that I couldn't do this, what I am doing. But they don't know. They lied to me. Other trans women have done it. I mourn the loss of my children and family, and I've heard my friends mourning them too. But the truth is that even after 8 years on estrogen and T blockers, you only have to go off your hormones for a few months to make gametes. Other trans women taught me how to do it. Okay, I'm just going to skip to the end of this now so I can talk about it. So, this project called Pregnancy, I made in 2014. Those are all real dates. And I wanted to have a child with my partner, but I was about to have surgery. And so I fortunately ran into some friends who were also trans women who told me that what the doctors said was a lie. So doctors tell trans women that when you start taking hormones, you're going to be sterile. Like when you're like, I want hormones, they're like, are you sure? Because the first estrogen pill you take, you're going to be sterile, so you better just forget about having kids. And I think of that now as just a deterrent, just a way to keep people from getting access to the medication they need. So what I learned from other trans women is that it's not true, that actually I could just stop taking my hormones and then I would produce sperm again. And so I did that process, and I joined this online Facebook group. And, but I didn't know, when I would be ready, when I would be producing sperm again. So, one of the other women in this online group suggested that, you don't have to go to a doctor and ask them when you are fertile over and over again and pay for tons and tons of doctor's visits. That instead, you could just get a $50 kids microscope and be able to see your own biological material. So that's what this is. I just literally made a stack of books and put my phone on top of the microscope and put the lens for the phone camera lined up with the microscope lens and made these videos of my own biological material. And I wrote poems as I was going through that process of trying to have a baby with my partner. And then I wrote an essay about it later, so if you want to read all the poems and read the essay with it, it's in Transgender Studies Quarterly, and this video is also online now at Ada Journal. I don't know the website. It's maybe Ada New Media, ADA, Journal of New Media and Technology. So you can see all the poems and the video online. And so in that article, part of what I said is that I want more than just to live, because for so long, I was really afraid that I would be killed. As a trans woman of color, or as a Latina trans woman, the statistics are that I should be dead by now. Our lifespan is not 41 years old. So I spent a lot of time, and a lot of the artwork that I'm going to show today even is really about surviving. But it's shitty living like that. And I feel like I spent a good 10 years just being in fight or flight and just being always afraid. And so a lot of my more recent work is thinking not just about physical safety, but also thinking about what is the feeling of safety and how do we get there. And that feeling might be fleeting and brief, but even if we can feel that feeling of safety for a little while, I think it's worth it to try. And my more recent work is even thinking, like, how do we, in this environment that is rapidly collapsing and this planet that is perhaps potentially going to kill us or is dying, how do we still find beauty and joy and connection? So that's where that idea of we want more than just to live comes from. And also partly from this other trans woman author, Morgan Robin Collado, who wrote that, the murders of trans women of color is also a reproductive justice issue. Because if people don't live past 35, then it's less likely that they're going to be able to have a child or have a family or get a PhD. So the PhD is not a reproductive issue, but have a family. Achieve their dreams. So that's that project where this idea started. So rewinding a little bit, the trajectory of a lot of this artwork that I'm going to show started with this project called the Transborder Immigrant Tool. And so that was a project that I did in collaboration with the Electronic Disturbance Theater, with Amy Sarah Carroll, Ricardo Dominguez, Brett Stahlbaum, and Ellie Mermand. Is it 2014? Oh, 2012. Yeah, I'm not sure when that project ends because we kept exhibiting it. We're still exhibiting it, but I don't think I'm not developing it still. So this was a project that I mentioned in the previous panel, a project to create a mobile phone app that would let people find water in the U.S.-Mexico border, or that would let people find water in the desert. So to make this project, and we made a working version of this, a functional beta. So to make this project, we collaborated with community organizations called Border Angels and Water Stations, Inc., and we went out with them into the desert to put out these water caches and then made a GPS map. So at first, 2007 was the year the first iPhone was released. When we started this project, not very few people had access to GPSs. And so when I started this project, I was using like a Garmin handheld GPS that we got from like Walmart or something. That's just like a GPS in your hand to mark the coordinates. So, it was very speculative at the time. Like, what if we could use GPS technology to help people cross the border or to help people survive, really? But also to provide poetic sustenance. So there were poems in the phone so that once you turn it on and like start navigating, you would have the option of hearing poems. And so Amy Sarah Carroll wrote the poems that went in the phone. And some of them were more conceptual, but a lot of them were really about survival. So Amy was reading survival manuals, like desert survival manuals, like survivalist books, and then encoding those things into poetry. Like, how do you tell north from looking at flowers? Or how do you collect dew in the morning if you really need water? Because the number one cause of death is dehydration. One way to survive is to just collect dew in the morning. Little water droplets on plants. Or how do you tell what is a poisonous cactus versus a cactus that is full of drinkable water? That's what the poems that she wrote were about. So this set me on a longer path of thinking about technologies for survival and how I could build technologies for myself and my communities to help us survive. So I... 3 minutes, okay. So I started this project called Local Autonomy Networks while I was still working on the Transborder Immigrant Tool. And so it's also AutoNets for short, I called it. So in this project, I was thinking about how to make mesh network clothing and thinking about how we could use wearable electronics to build safety networks for trans women of color, people of color, women, just for all kinds of people experiencing violence. And so I built a few different prototypes of dresses and hoodies that had, so like here's one of the hoodies that was designed in collaboration with Ben Klunker, who's a fashion designer. So this one was really simple, and also here's the dress. So I built mesh networking transmitters into these. So the idea was that if you need help, you could just turn on your dress or your hoodie, and the lights on your hoodie would turn on, and also the lights on anyone else in your network, theirs would also turn on. And like I said, at first I started making GPS versions so that you could get some sort of directions to actually get to your friend. But then I was doing workshops with people right away, and a lot of the feedback that I got from people like sex workers or people in activists in Colombia, they said that they did not want to be GPS tracked. And so the later versions, I actually reduced them to be much simpler, so they were just literally the mesh transmitter and the battery. So in this way, you could detect the proximity of the people in your network because these XB transmitters have a signal strength indicator which tells you roughly how close or far people are. So it was not very precise. It was definitely a prototype to spur conversations in workshops. So I did workshops in 11 different cities and built performances out of those workshops. So one of those workshops we did at the 01 Biennial in San Jose, and so this one was in collaboration with Gender Justice Los Angeles. So this is the group, I was living in Los Angeles and doing my PhD at the time, so this is the group that I collaborated with for the longest. I collaborated with them for over a year. And when I encountered them, I was really happy and excited to work with them because they have, so there's a larger kind of nonprofit called Gender Justice LA, which works for safety for queer and trans people and non-binary people and low-income people in Los Angeles. But they also had like a smaller kind of sub-internal group that was doing Theater of the Oppressed, and they were doing that they were meeting every other week to do Theater of the Oppressed. And so this was like a perfect collaboration for me because I had been doing Theater of the Oppressed for many years since my MFA. I still find it to be a really important technique that I use a lot in teaching and use for developing performances. And it's just like a kind of group of exercises and games that people can use to think about interesting new ways of moving. How many people have done Theater of the Oppressed? Anybody? Okay, one person. So it was developed in Brazil by Augusto Boal, and the idea was to find like nonverbal ways of working through problems that were not being solved through discussion. So he was thinking about like dictatorships or like Israel-Palestine or all kinds of ethnic conflicts between people in which sitting down at a table and having a conversation was not producing any kind of progress or movement. So he developed these set of exercises to kind of explore power and oppression, but also to think about new ways of moving. And a main idea he had is that ideas and emotions are embodied in gestures. And so if we move in the same way every day, if we just like get up, we brush our teeth, we go to work, we go to school, we drive our car, we sit at the desk, we sit like this, then we go home, we sit in front of the TV, blah, blah, blah. If we move in the same way every single day, he said, how are we supposed to have new ideas? So his idea was that if you could move in new, interesting, weird ways, that maybe we could come up with new ideas. And that if you were doing that with people you were in conflict, you could use that to work through problems. And so the one of the like final versions of Theater of the Oppressed is where like a community comes up with a problem in a workshop, and they actually we get volunteers from the community, then people come up on stage or in front of the group, they act out this conflict, and then the audience watches. And then they act it out a second time, and then anybody in the audience gets to clap and stop the action, and then come up on stage and tap somebody out and try to create a different outcome. So that's the like actual forum theater kind of final version, biggest version of Theater of the Oppressed. But some of them are smaller. So like this performance came about through a couple of exercises, movement exercises. One is just like the really simple kind of mirror exercise, which is like, you get into pairs, one person faces the other, and one person's the mirror and the other one is the image. So the image moves, and then the person who's mirroring tries to mirror them. And then the facilitator would like call out a word, and then the person who's the image could make an image of that word, and the person who's mirroring would try to mirror it. So we did that exercise, variations on that exercise, to come up with movements thinking about safety and protection. And then we combine them into a kind of flocking exercise where people stand in a group and the person who's in the front does their movement, and then everybody else tries to mirror at the same time. So, yes, there's that project. Should we do that exercise? Does anybody want to try Theater of the Oppressed? Raise your hand if you want to get up. No one? Okay. I won't be oppressive by making you do Theater of the Oppressed. So I did this workshop. We did a lot of Theater of the Oppressed. Okay. What else? So another one of the workshops I did in Detroit, it was at the Ally Media Conference. It was in the summer. It was super freaking hot. We were all like dripping sweat. And I had these hoodies. And I was like, you can use this networked hoodie. And they were like, I have no desire to wear a hoodie right now. They were like, why don't you make some bracelets and come back to us? So I was like, okay, cool. Go back to the workshop, make some bracelets. So that's how the bracelets idea came about. But also part of the feedback that they gave was, we already get, this is a workshop with like queer and trans youth in Detroit. And they're like, we already get too much attention. We don't want to walk down the street looking like cyborgs. Like, if we have some cool blinking lights and silver shit, we just look expensive and like a Target. So, no thanks. So could you design a version of this that would be discreet? And I was like, okay, great. Go back to the workshop, make some new things, come back to the thing. Okay, so this version of the auto nets was all of the circuitry was just sewn inside the hoodie and inside the seams. So when it wasn't activated, it looked like just a regular hoodie. You would have to be like looking really close at it to be like, oh, there's actually lights all around the hood, which was originally supposed to be like a directional indicator. But then once you turned it on, then you could see the kind of lights in the hood turn on. And then this is a dress, and also the electronics were sewn into the dress. But the dress was definitely fancier and not so much discreet, but it was trying to like make some interesting design. So I worked with Ben Clunker. He's a really great fashion designer. I am not a great fashion designer. I'm just a girl with some ideas. So Ben did all the incredible sewing on these, and I added the electronics. His name should be there if I took more time to make my slides. Usually his name is on the slide. So what else? So another workshop that I did in local autonomy networks was the one that I mentioned earlier. That was I was developed in collaboration with this group from Bogota, 029, and they were like, these hoodies are too expensive, so let's make a workshop for thinking about what are safety strategies that people could develop now that don't require any investment, any money at all. So how do you talk to your friends about having a safety network? And maybe people do this already, but in my workshops, a lot of people had never done this. Like, have a conversation with a friend about like having a buddy system, or about like, if I get sexually assaulted, can I call you? Because for a lot of queer and trans people and people of color in the US, calling the police just means more violence. There are many cases in which someone is sexually assaulted, they call the police show up and sexually assault them again. So I feel this is like the biggest contribution of this project, was to get people in workshops, and hopefully after the workshops, to start having real conversations with their friends about building local safety networks. And about like, what are we gonna do if I get assaulted, or if I get beat up, or if I get mugged? Like, do I want you to call the police, or do I want you to call my mother? Or would it be really bad if you called those people? Would it be better if you just come get me? So we did some of that in this workshop, and since it was a encuentro of performance and politics, we did make a performance art piece out of it. Again, using that flocking technique of having somebody come up with a movement and then sharing that movement with others, so that We did them all together as a group. And in this performance, we also practiced like dispersing and coming back together in a group in public space, which I think is another good safety method, especially thinking about safety at protests, for example. So that set me on another path, a future path of trying to actually move away from electronics in my wearables and still thinking about wearable art.